Tonight, so we're making a sautéed vegetable dish that originates from the Mediterranean area. It's Greek, let's see. This sounds tasty. Just wanted to log in to check if we're going to be recorded, and it seems like it will be. I'll check out the. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, you can always check the recording later. So it originates from Greece, and we're using fennel tonight. So fennel looks like a hybrid between like if licorice and celery had a baby. you have this wonderful anise flavor. Let's just go over it. So you have your bulb, and then you have your fronds, and all of this fennel part is edible. Okay, so the bulb, fronds, the little leaves that come off of it, that is all edible. And what we're going to do is we are going to slice these off here in a moment. I'm going to peel off this outer layer of the bulb. Now this is a little thicker. So for the pickle, you could probably get away with it because that vinegar and that salt brine and the sugar would get in there and kind of soften this tissue. But since we're sauteing it, I recommend that you pull off the outer layer because it's very fibrous and it's gonna, the cooking process isn't really gonna soften it too much, okay? So we'll go over that in a moment. Difference between a saute and a stir fry. So stir fry generally relies on the oil to help transfer heat in the cooking process. With the saute, you typically want to go with a little bit less oil than what you would use in a stir fry, and it's more about the contact heat from the pan that you are using. Now I'm gonna preface this. I am using a wok tonight, and generally you would want to use the saute pan. The saute pans that I have and the oven that I have, they don't really go very well in how they transfer heat. So I'm using the wok so that way I can get that golden color that I want. If you are going to use a wok though, do not use as much oil as the recipe. Otherwise, you're going to stir fry it and it's going to taste good, but it's going to be really greasy. So just enough oil, just so there's a thin little micro layer of oil so it doesn't burn. Because what we want is that golden browning of the fennel tonight. Okay. Also, we are using garlic. And when you saute garlic, you generally need to be careful. You need to watch it, otherwise it can burn very easily. So for tonight, it's going to be medium-high heat, and it's going to be think of long, slow, steady process for cooking tonight. We don't want to rush. Think of the stir fry is being quick to the point. Let's go. This one's slow. You're having a conversation, having a glass of wine with your food. Okay, so I'm going to switch to. If you have any questions, feel free to ask at any moment. I'm going to switch to the Epoch camera, and we will get started. So. All right. So yay, it's working tonight. So right now. You can see that I have the fennel bulb, I have the setup. Okay, so I've already peeled the garlic. So I'm only doing half of the recipe. The recipe calls for 4 bulbs of fennel, 6 cloves of garlic. So I have 3, and one was really big, so I sliced it in half so that way it would cook more evenly. Okay. So for our preparation, we would already wash our fennel, and we're going to cut the fronds off. So you want to get as close to the bulb as you can as you cut the fronds. And we're going to reserve those because we're going to use that later on in the, I know I'm angling it this way so that you can see. We're going to use that later on as a seasoning later in the cooking process. All right, so we cut the bulb. All right. And we're going to peel off this outer layer just because it's typically thick. And I know there's going to be different shapes and sizes of our fennel. So if you have a really thin or a tiny bulb, you can, and you think it's going to be not as fibrous, you can leave it on. You can deviate from what I did, and that's perfectly fine. But in the testing, I had a pretty medium-sized bulb, and it was just really, really thick to work with. So I actually probably pulled off a lot, but you can reserve this, use it in your stock. Okay. And what we're going to do is this root part we're going to take off. Oops. You can reserve that for stock as well. And then we're going to quarter it. So you're going to cut up down the middle. And then we want to check it out. So here we have the haft fennel. And see how there's this big core? Now, if it's thin enough, which this one is, you could probably just leave it in and it will get cooked. It should be okay. But what I noticed in the testing of this recipe, it helps if you cut out the really deepest part of that core. So that way it just cooks more evenly. Okay, so I'm going to quarter it first. And then just kind of trim off a little bit of that core. So that way it's going to cook more evenly. So this is my quartered piece. So you're going to do that with every bulb of fennel that you have. If you're making the full recipe, it's 4 bulbs of fennel. Okay. All right, so I already had another bulb of fennel that I've already pre-cut, so this is about half of what you would have, all right? It's all pre-washed. And then what we need to do, so any little bits of the bulb, save it, put it in your stock. And then we need to finely chop some of the fronds. So for the full recipe for the fronds, you would have 4 tablespoons. So I'm gonna only do 2 because I'm doing half. Okay, so knife skills, take this down, it's like a handshake. You pinch here and the other fingers go on the underside. Okay, so, and we're just going to slice this fennel. We want to make it very, so this thick part leave out. So once you have some leaves to work with, you're just going to chop it very, 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 very finely. And you're going to reserve that because it'll be used later on as seasoning for the sauté. Okay, so I have the wok on the stove right now and it's heating up. It's going to be medium to medium high heat. And you want to bring the oil up to temperature as well. Now, medium to medium high, so slow and steady. You don't want too hot of a cooking pan. And the reason why is 1, it can burn the olive oil and that doesn't taste good. 2, it can burn the garlic and you get this like bitterness from the garlic. We want to unlock the flavor of the garlic, but not have that burnt bitter note. And we also want it to be a slow and steady raise so that way we get that caramelization of the fennel as we cook it. Okay, so that's about a tablespoon right there. And then that's about half a tablespoon. I'm going to chop it a little bit more and then we'll go to the sauté part. You are also going to need to squeeze some lemon juice. Okay, for the full recipe, it's going to be 2 tablespoons. Because I'm only doing half, I'll be 1, and I'll do that in just a moment. Give me a sec to chop the fronds. All parts of the fennel are edible, and the leftover fronds can be sliced and used on a salad. They can be pickled, like in the pickle that we did last week. You can use it in stock, and it adds a really nice, subtle licorice note to your stocks. We will be making vegetable stock for our red lentils dish that's coming up. So you want to reserve your veggie scraps. Put them in a baggie in the freezer because we will be making that. So there's about 2 tablespoons. All right, so you have 2 different ways, multiple ways actually, to do your lemon juice. I'm just going to use one of these little squeezer things. So just push it in. It's quick and easy. And it's really effective at getting a lot of the juice. There is a tip with your lemon juice. If you put this in the microwave for about 10 seconds, cut it, and then do this, you'll get actually more juice out. So. Okay, so let's see how much that is. So that is about a tablespoon of lemon juice. All right, So we did our preparation. We also have tomato juice. Later on, we will be using this to kind of deglaze the pan, and because it's very acidic, so this is with the combination of the lemon juice. And that is going to be about a quarter cup if you're doing half the recipe. It's going to be half cup if it is the full recipe. All right, so I got all of the items ready. I'm going to switch now over to the, I'm just gonna move the camera over to the stove and hopefully the camera doesn't fall off the stand. Okay, here we are. So we got our nice warm wok. You would typically want to use a saute pan though because it's gonna have a larger surface area. Woks are designed to kind of hold the oil near the center, and that can lead to your saute getting really soggy, which we don't want. We don't want it to be greasy. So notice that I did not put very much oil in at all, and that's because I am sauteing. I am not stir frying. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give that a few seconds and let that come to temp. See if this light makes any difference. Oh, too bright. Okay. All right. That's good. And you're just going to put them in. That nice crackling noise. We're just going to let that heat up. And we want that crackle, we want that contact, because that is what's going to give us that caramelization. You do want to check and make sure it's not burning though. Okay. And this is going to be for about 8 minutes that we're doing the slow and steady saute of the fennel. Slow and steady, you're checking it, you're flipping it, you're making sure that it's not burning. And I'm just going to go ahead and check, hopefully it's not burning. Look at that, so we got some browning already starting. Now if you have a saute pan, you can use that whole amount of oil because it is going to need it. Okay, but you don't want tons of oil on the bottom. You actually want it to have a lot more contact with the pan than you would with a typical stir fry. I don't know if you can see the brown. Let me see if I can change the angle of this. Is that better? A little bit better. Less glare, right? Yeah, you can see the brown. So slow and steady wins the race. Notice that I have not put in the garlic yet. The instructions say to put in the garlic with it. I want to give this a little bit more time with the fennel. So that way, when I add the garlic, it's going to be less likely to burn. And I'm going to add just a little bit more olive oil into that. You just want a thin layer of oil. Just move these around a little bit. The smell is starting to unlock. So it's that nice anise smell, but it also has like, I can get like celery, almost like an earthiness to it. And these will soften. Even though they look very rigid at the moment, they will soften as they continue to cook. And you might want to move them around. Okay, so wine pairing for this dish would be Pinot Gris. The reason why is because we're caramelizing the sugars in the fennel, the natural occurring sugars. And so it is going to have a subtle sweetness, and it will still retain some of that licorice flavor. So to balance that out, you would use like a Pinot Gris. That'd be good. Some crisp white wine. This would be best served with, think of like your Mediterranean cuisine. So if you eat fish, it would go well with fish. You could have this with chicken. That would go really well. For vegetarians, you can do this with a baked tofu, that's like crispy tofu. That would be really nice. You could also use that tempeh dish that we made a few weeks ago. You could saute the tempeh after the fennel. So you got some various options there. Mushrooms would be a great one if you eat mushrooms. Oh, that's looking lovely. So we still have about another 3.5 minutes to go. Once again, slow and steady. If this was a stir fry, it'd be done by now, right? we would have added in our seasonings, and we would have had that oil really, really hot. We would have thrown everything in, and it would have done really well. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to add just a little bit more olive oil. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I am using a wok. I don't want it to be soggy. And I'm going to add in the garlic. Now, you can try adding your garlic in at the beginning, like the instructions say, but you really need to keep an eye on it. And now that the fennel has softened, I'm going to start turning it more. That garlic is going to impart its flavor, and it's going to brown, but we do not want it to turn black. We want it to stay brown and just kind of caramelize. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. In the meantime, I'm going to get the tomato juice ready. Ready for the pour. Okay, that's all set. And it's going to stick. That's one thing that is part of doing a saute. You might have little sticky bits, and that is all right. And the reason why is because we're about to apply something acidic onto this pan that's going to help deglaze those little brown bits that make things taste so good. Okay, so even if you see that, that's okay. That's just browning. It's not the end of the world. If you don't want it in your dish, you can always remove it. So we got about another minute to go. Once again, slow and steady, slow and steady. And see how the garlic starts to sweat? It's sweating those oils out. And that's what you want on your fennel as you toss it around gently. Because we've still got about another 8 to 10 minutes to go once we add that tomato. So don't worry about if I added the garlic a little bit later. It's going to really unlock the flavor when we add in the tomato juice. All right, so that is around the 8-minute mark. So you're going to add in, for half the recipe, is going to be a 1/4 cup of tomato juice, and that's going to deglaze. Okay, then you're going to add in your lemon juice. You want to stir that around. Let's go to 8 minutes. And mix that around to start deglazing those little brown bits that have stuck to the bottom, because those are full of flavor. And this tomato juice is going to reduce. And as it reduces, it's going to coat the fennel and add that acidity that kind of balances out the sweetness and the licorice. There is a subtle bitterness too. All right, so while that is starting to reduce, I'm going to add in some crushed or cracked black pepper. Let's add in the prawns. So finely chopped prawns go in. Isn't that kind of cool? You cook one part of the plant and you use the other part as a nice seasoning. Okay, we have not added salt yet, so that's going to come up in a moment, but I want it to reduce a little bit before we add salt. And salt's one of those things where you want to be a little cautious, because you can always add a little bit at a time, taste it, and then adjust later. But if you add a lot all at the beginning, it can really backfire. So be cautious. All right, so I'm going to add in salt. This is kosher salt, and that's typically what you want to use when you're cooking at home. You use your iodized salt in things that you bake that use the active dry yeast, so that way you get that iodine. You know, things that aren't affected by it, you would never use it in sourdough. Or you could use it as a table salt on meats or anything like that, but typically you need kosher salt for cooking, just because it doesn't have that iodine. Okay, so see how this is starting to split apart, and it's softened quite a bit, and that is what we want. We want that it to kind of blossom, to kind of open up. And this is it's starting to make a little sauce almost that coats every little bit of the fennel. Okay, we'll let that rest a bit. Remember, slow and steady with the saute. And what's nice about this, so if you look, there's not this residual grease. That is just the tomato sauce, or sorry, tomato juice, excuse me, that's turned into sauce. There's not grease just kind of hanging out. So as I pull air, there's not really olive oil that's just kind of residual. So that's what we want. We want just enough so that way it provides that protective layer so things can brown, but not so much that it turns this into a greasy mess. We want it to be light, light. All right, so I'm gonna let that sit there for a little bit. We still got a few more minutes. While it cooks, I'm gonna get the plate ready so that way we can go right to the viewing once it's done. So just give me a moment. I'll switch the camera in preparation for the viewing. So what I am going to serve this with tonight is it's going to be, I made some white rice. You can do that quinoa that we did for the stuffed bell peppers. You could do quinoa that has been cooked in chicken stock or vegetable stock. That would go well with this. Rice would go well. You have a lot of different options there. You could do this with a pita if you want, and maybe some yogurt. There's a lot of different choices. Okay, so tonight I have white rice, and I went ahead and I pre-baked some tofu. Let me show you the tofu. because we're doing a vegetarian tonight. So this is just baked tofu, and it's crispy, and I covered it with olive oil before I baked it, and it has a little bit of cornstarch on it to make it crispy. So that is a nice treat. You get some protein, you got your carbohydrates from your rice, and then you have a lot of your fiber and main notes coming from the fennel. So it's a really nice meal. So you could use fish. If you eat fish, you could do chicken. A baked chicken would be really good, like a baked lemon chicken. That would be delicious. And I'm just getting the plate ready while it's cooking. So after the saute, we're going to go do a quick checkup for those who are doing the sourdough. Little tips, questions. We are doing sourdough bread next week. So if you are curious and haven't done sourdough, this would be a great time to try it out. Okay, so I have that. Let's do a quick stir. Okay, so see how much it has reduced? So there's been a lot of water that has evaporated off of this. And see how the garlic is caramelized? Let's see if I can get it up close. This is what we want. We want nice caramelization. If the heat was too high, this would blacken and it would turn crispy. And we would not want that. It would be too much bitterness. Got about another minute to go. When sauteing, it's like a relationship. You want it to be long, healthy, have that conversation. Have your glass of wine. About 30 more seconds, and then we'll go to the viewing. Now, you would typically do this in a saute pan, just keep that in mind. So if you're doing a larger volume, a wok probably wouldn't be good because see how it elevates on the sides. Because I was doing like only two, this worked out because there was more contact here with the heat. Because the wok typically relies on you having more oil. So if you're doing a larger volume, you would definitely want to do this in a saute pan. But because this glass stovetop is difficult to work with, that is why I'm using a wok. So I'm going to move this over for the viewing. Okay, and we'll see what it looks like. You'll get more colors now, but there's a better lighting. Okay, so we have the sauteed fennel right there. So, and this is baked tofu. And then those garlic pieces, if you like garlic, they're going to taste wonderful. If you don't like garlic, please be nice to your family members and don't let that be a surprise. All right. So let's see. All right, so we have our sauteed fennel, and we have some baked tofu, crispy tofu, and we have some rice. Now you could put yogurt on this if you want, kind of drizzle it. That would be excellent. And I'm going to cut it so that way you can see what it looks like on the inside of the fennel. Okay, so let's see if we can get that in the camera angle. A little bit. You might have it. Okay, so it's been caramelized and it's nice and soft. We took off that outer there you go, that outer layer of the fennel bulb, and that was more fibrous, and so we left this more tender part to be cooked. So that was the sauteed fennel. So I'm going to switch back to the forward-facing view, and we can do Q&A, and we'll do a quick little check-in about sourdough. So any questions about the sauteed fennel that you may have?
Should we sprinkle any of the fronds over? Okay.
Yeah. So I did some finely chopped parts of the frond. Oh, you mean for after you serve?
Yes, I was wondering if you could do it at the end. Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That actually is a really good idea. So you added it in midway, and then you could add some more of the fresh fronds for that color, and that green and that golden dichotomy contrast is going to be amazing. And we eat with our eyes too, so that makes a lot of sense. I like that, kind of like as a garnish. Yeah, definitely. Any other questions? All right. So you can type questions if you have them, or you can chime in at any moment, even if I'm going over the sourdough. All right, so let's talk about this. This is the sourdough that we started last week that I showed you. Okay, and I'm gonna switch to the Epoch camera, so that way you can see what it looks like on the inside. All right, so I just used plastic, and this was a wide mouth mason jar. And you can see now, so I've been feeding this every day, and there is a layer of liquid on top, okay? That is called hooch. That is a mixture of vinegar and water and whatever stuff that the culture has released, and it kind of surfaces to the top. It's not bad. It's okay. When you see that, you will mix it back in, right? And then you see that there's a lot of activation. There's a lot of bubbling, and that means that the culture is eating the carbohydrate in the flour, and that's being turned into gas, carbon dioxide, and that's what's surfacing. Okay, so that's what we want. That is a live, healthy culture. Now you want to look around the edges, and you want to make sure that you don't see any green fuzzies or black fuzzies or black dots. Those would be indications that this is not a healthy culture, and it would probably be better to discard that and start again. Okay, now this has been fed for a week. It's been in the same mason jar, and there is a test that you can do, and this is with the wheat flour. Now if you're doing a gluten free, I don't know if this test will work because of the different material that you're using. But let me do the quick test to see if this sourdough is ready. So all you need is a little bit of water, and I'm getting that right now. We always try and avoid putting metal in direct contact with the sourdough. So I have some water, so you can see. Okay, and you just take a little bit of your sourdough after you fed it, so maybe 2 hours at least after you fed it, and then you just drop it into the water, and if it floats, which it is, part of it is floating, you are good to go. If it sinks, then it probably needs a little bit more time to feed it, to make sure that it is vibrant enough for sourdough bread. So this one's kind of on its way. See how it eventually sank? That's okay. We're only talking about the first few seconds when you dump it in. That means that it has enough gas. So the bacteria and yeast in the culture are eating the carbohydrate enough, so that's producing enough gas for that rise to make that crumb that we want for the and you can just discard this for the sourdough. That's a quick and easy test. I would actually say this is probably good to go. And if you smell it, it's going to smell vinegary, and that's what we want. So if you're leaving this at room temperature and you've been feeding it for a week to 2 weeks, and you start to notice that when you dump it, so you always dump half and then you feed it, right? If you notice accumulation of just dried flour, that is a breeding ground for molds. Okay, so so I'm going to go ahead and change this out. And I just want you all to see that because you want to get in the habit of changing out your mason jars so that way you don't accumulate that residue that can lead to unwanted bugs, molds, developing in your culture. Now the benefit is if you have a vibrant culture, that culture is going to crowd out any of the unwanted ones. So any of the molds, if you have a vibrant culture, that culture will grow faster than what the molds can and crowd them out and kill them off. And also that vinegar helps. It doesn't prevent it entirely, but it does help, okay? And that is what's, okay, so I just poured out as much as I can. You can wash this and then put it through the dishwasher so it's sterilized, or mostly sterilized. Okay, so I put that into a new cup and just continue feeding this for the next week. And it should be good to go for next week for sourdough. All right, any questions on sourdough? I'm gonna switch back to the front view.
Okay, Alex, if it does get ready and it's still about a week before we're going to use it, well, okay, first of all, my gluten-free one is telling me to feed it every 8 hours instead of twice a day. So yeah. It's eating me out of house and home with the cost of the gluten-free flour.
Yeah.
So I need to send it to college. Can it go in the refrigerator and kind of slow down the process or not?
Usually, so I know with the wheat-based ones, you can. And you can leave it in the fridge for up to a week without feeding it. I would look at the product and see if there are any indications that you can put it in the fridge. I bet you can. I bet it'll be okay.
If I do that, about how long before we are going to bake do I need to get it out? About a day?
I would pull it out that day or the night before and feed it. At least feed it probably like 4 to 8 hours before we're going to use it, so that way it's nice and active.
Okay.
Yeah. But it should be tasty and delicious. Yeah. And as long as like when you feed it and everything, and it has that nice sour smell, and you see bubbles, you are good. You're gonna be okay. Any other questions? Okay. So next week is sourdough. We're going to talk about sourdough bread, and then while we are I'm going to have 3 different sourdough phases already pre-made because there's a lot of waiting. The beauty of sourdough is that if you are oh, sorry, Rachel typed a question on tofu. Oh, quick steps of how you made the baked tofu. Did you marinate it and leave it for a while you baked it? Okay, so this is what I did with the tofu, and then I'll get to the sourdough questions. So I sliced the tofu about 3/4 of an inch in like 3/4 of an inch squares. So it's still the same size as the tofu that you get out of the package. It's just 3/4 of an inch in depth. Okay, and then I put those out on a chopping board. Then I put a paper towel either on top or underneath, either's fine, and then another chopping board on top, and then some type of weighted object on top. So I let that sit for like 15 minutes so that paper towel would squish it and absorb a lot of the moisture. Then pulled that paper towel off, discarded that, and sliced it into the tiny, this is about like 3/4 of an inch cubes. And put that in a bowl, drizzled olive oil on top, salted it, peppered it, and then I put garlic powder. You can put any seasoning that you want. You can get very creative with the different options. And then a little bit of cornstarch, about a teaspoon of cornstarch, maybe a little bit more if you like really crispy. So olive oil, drizzled all that, and just gently tossed it with 2 spoons so that all the edges are coated with the olive oil, cornstarch spice mixture. Then you put it in the oven for 400 degrees on a baking sheet that has a piece of parchment paper on it. And you want to gently distribute the tofu evenly throughout the baking sheet on that parchment paper. You want a little bit of space between each one, so that way the air can get in and cook it. You put it in for 15 minutes, okay, and then you pull it out, you flip them. You use the spatula and you flip it, and then you put it back in for another 15 minutes. So a total of 30 minutes of cooking, and then you pull it out and it's good to go. So, yeah, okay, so question about tofu. Okay, back to sourdough. So I'm going to go over the different phases of making your sourdough bread, and then if you don't have a banneton, you can use a other pan. That will be fine, or a bowl even. Those are okay. You'll just need to make sure you have either parchment paper, or if it's a bowl, oil to coat between, or even you can use flour or rice flour. Those will work. Other thing that we're going to go over, things to do with your extra sourdough starter, because you're feeding this culture and you're dumping half of it, right? And you're like, that's wasteful, right? What am I going to do with that? So you can save your starter, and there's some things that we can do. So we're going to go over the savory pancake, okay? We're going to go over sourdough waffles. And those are going to be like two things. So you got a all day meal that you can make with the savory pancake, and then you have a breakfast that you can make with your leftover sourdough starter. So some cool things that we can go over. All right. So I look forward to seeing everyone next week. If you have more questions, I'll stay on. Otherwise, see you in a week. And take care, everyone.
Thanks, Alex.
You're welcome. Bye, y'all.